Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and it's well known that more than 70% of the American Jewish community support the Democratic Party and vote Democratic. This has been a reality of Jewish life since the days of FDR and the social programs he initiated through the New Deal. Jews have had an allegiance to the Democratic Party because Jews tend to be socially liberal when it comes to minority rights, abortion, equal pay for equal work, when it comes to gay rights, when it comes to programs aimed at redressing racial injustice, civil rights, issues aimed at helping the poor, the disadvantaged. American Jews have traditionally felt that the Democratic Party best embodies their values and goals. This is not to suggest that Jews who feel more comfortable with the Republican Party do not share many of the same values as Jews who identify with the Democratic Party. But the Republican Party often articulates its goals and priorities in a different way. And the more socially conservative perspective of the Republican Party has typically been less attractive to the vast majority of American Jews, who tend to be on the liberal end of the social and political spectrum. At the same time, traditionally over the past 60, 70 years, when it comes to the support of the State of Israel, there's been pretty much bipartisan support. Democrats and Republicans may disagree about many things, but the United States Congress has been pretty united when it comes to the support of the State of Israel. However, over the past 10 years or so, there seems to be a growing crack in bipartisan congressional support for Israel. Many American Jews who've been Democrats their entire lives, whose parents were Democrats, who care deeply about the importance of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, are increasingly concerned with positions taken on the far left of the Democratic Party with respect to Israel. Beginning with a crowd that booed the decision to put Jerusalem back into the Democratic platform at the 2012 Democratic National Convention. There was some concern with President Obama's statement that there should be daylight between the United States and Israel, and with Mr. Obama's identifying Israeli settlements as the obstacle to peace between the Palestinians and Israel. And of course, President Obama's stormy relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu became well known on many levels, culminating in Mr. Obama's permitting an anti-Israel resolution to be passed in the UN Security Council shortly before his presidency came to an end. But the bigger fallout from the Obama-Netanyahu relationship centered around the Iran nuclear deal, which the president was pushing as hard as he could, and which Mr. Netanyahu was opposing as forcefully as he could. When the Republican House Majority Leader John Boehner invited the Israeli Prime Minister to address a joint session of Congress on the Iran deal without prior approval from the Obama administration, the crack in support for Israel spread to the United States Congress. Democratic members of Congress made it a point of publicly boycotting the Israeli Prime Minister's address. And to many observers, bipartisan support for Israel has been, ever since, in the decline, as it seems as if the Democratic Party is not nearly as sympathetic to Israel's position vis-a-vis the Palestinians, while the left in the Democratic Party seems to be much more sympathetic to a Palestinian people whom they see as being the victim of Israeli occupation and oppression, even apartheid. And with the most recent midterm elections of 2018, things have seemed to grow significantly worse. 3 first-term congresswomen who identify with the far left and who become major voices inside the Democratic Party have taken anti-Israel positions. Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez all support BDS, the single most immoral movement in the Western world today, which is committed to the destruction of a nation-state of the United Nations. Ilhan Omar, who made the obnoxious Benjamin's remark about Jewish money controlling U.S. foreign policy, has accused Israel of being evil, and has questioned whether members of Congress supportive of Israel have forgotten which country they represent. After Ms. Omar's shocking remarks, Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party tried to pass a resolution specifically condemning anti-Semitism. But the resolution was watered down to being against hate in general. Rashida Tlaib, an outspoken supporter of BDS, who advocates a one-state solution, compared boycotting Israel to boycotting Nazi Germany. Tlaib said she would allow Congress to attack the right to, quote, boycott the racist policies of the government and state of Israel. Tlaib also told Skullduggery that when she thinks of the Holocaust, she's comforted in knowing that her Palestinian ancestors created, quote, a safe haven for Jews during the Holocaust, even if it meant the Palestinians would lose their land, their national identity, and their human dignity. It would be troubling enough for a member of Congress here and there to be spouting anti-Israel canards, but when a highly visible group of Congress begins bashing Israel, and the mature grown-ups in the Democratic Party say virtually nothing, more and more Jewish Democrats who support Israel begin to wonder and have real concerns about being at home in the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders, for example, calls the Netanyahu government racist, compares Israel to Saudi Arabia, and says U.S. policy cannot be 100% pro-Israel. Well, how serious a problem is this? Is it more media than real? Is support for Israel within the Democratic Party on the decline? For some answers, I am joined by a wonderful panel whose opinions I am most anxious to hear and share with you. I am so pleased always to have sitting next to me Thane Rosenbaum, Distinguished Fellow at NYU Law School, founding director of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society, in addition to being an award-winning novelist and commentator on CBS News Radio for Law. And Thane's upcoming book is entitled Saving Free Speech from Itself. Eric Yoffie is President Emeritus of the Union for Reform Judaism, the Reform Movement's congregational arm. And Eric is a columnist who you can read in Haaretz and online at ericyoffie.com. Laura Adkins is an award-winning journalist and is the opinion editor of the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. And Jonathan Mark is the longtime associate editor of the Jewish Week of New York and one of the leading journalists on the American Jewish scene. As always, it is so wonderful to be sitting with all of you. Thank you for joining us. I want to begin with you, Thane. You heard my my concern about the Democratic Party. And it's not only my concern. Everywhere I go now, I meet Democrats who say to me, I've been a lifelong Democrat, and I'm feeling kind of strange here. Do I have a home? Will I have a home in the Democratic Party based on what I hear and what I don't hear? As someone who's been observing this yourself, as someone who brings a liberal perspective to bear, what's your reaction?
Well, Mark, the first question is, what is the Democratic Party now? It may be that the loudest section of it, the one that is receiving all the attention, which is the term of art, sucking the oxygen out of the air, is the squad. right? There's also a fourth woman. I
Yes.
forgot her name. She's a Palestinian.
Presley.
Ayanna Presley. Yeah.
So the four of them, they're women. They're women of color. This is the story. It's also in a time where even this election is shaping itself out as a fight against left and right, and left is looking more left than it has in at least a generation in terms of avowedly, openly, right? We have candidates now calling themselves democratic socialists. What is being called liberal today is really progressive. That's the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And that's what the squad is about. And then to some degree, this is what you're hearing from Sanders and Warren. The question is this really the Democratic Party? Then Jewish Democrats have a question to ask themselves for this next election. Is this their party? Or has it been hijacked? Has it moved left in not just social policy and activism, but more importantly with Israel? Because one of the things that's clear, and I trace this to the last presidential election, Bernie Sanders. He started this. And if Jews are upset about this, he's your guy. He's the one, during his early debates with Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination, that spoke as Israel as if it was speaking as if the disproportionate loss, disproportionate death, referring to the last Gaza war. He openly spoke about this. This was not something Hillary ever talked about. Bill Clinton himself, during the Gaza war, I remember, said, wait a minute, dead civilians is what Hamas is after. This is their job. This is what they do. You can't blame the Israelis for defending themselves. Obama could, and Sanders could. And when Sanders did, he became a useful idiot. He presented himself, look at me, I'm Jewish, I'm from Vermont, I lived in a kibbutz, and the Israelis are murderers. And he was essentially saying that this is inexcusable. So now we're hearing, remember during Ocasio-Cortez's election, I think it might have been after, she used the word massacre when she was referring to the March of Return. Massacre? What are you watching? That's not the word. So we're hearing a much more strident, openly hostile attacks against Israel, the delegitimization of Israel, the demonization of Israel, the elevating of BDS as if it's a human rights question. So I just think the real question is this truly representative of where Democrats are?
And do you have an answer?
I don't know. I don't really know. I want to think they're not. And
Okay,
the reason is because if Biden is really leading, then it's not them, right? Because if they're saying we really need a more moderate voice, then maybe Democrats, both Jewish and non-Jewish, are not that far left. But it is clear that's where the press is focusing. That's where the energy is focusing. These four women are become rock stars. And the question is, do those rock stars translate into national votes? And we will soon see.
Eric, what do you think? And you've been obviously part of the entire Democratic orientation, and you've spoken eloquently here before. But I'm so interested in hearing how you, who are about as passionate on Israel as anybody I've ever had on JBS, how you kind of see the issue of where is the far left of the Democratic Party on Israel, and what's it mean to the Jews you talk to? What does it mean to you as a Jew?
First of all, I think it's fair to say I would take issue with a number of elements of your initial introduction. We won't go into that now. I would have presented a different picture of the state of things right now. Second of all, Jews support the Democratic Party for a whole variety of reasons, having to do with social issues, having to do with broad economic. Yes, you mentioned that, broad economic issues and issues of equality and inequality and so on and so forth. There's a good reason for that support. My own view is that the Jews are not moving on those issues and are unlikely to move away from the Democratic Party because of those concerns. Now, on Israel. Let's not do the work of Donald Trump and make the Democratic Party the party of the squad. The Congress, the House, just passed an anti-BDS resolution. In my view, was a very good resolution. I hope people have read it. If not, they absolutely should go out and read it. It gave the reasons why we should should be opposed to BDS, or we must be opposed to BDS. Talked about American support for Israel, longstanding support for the Jewish state, also supported a two-state solution, which I certainly approve of, and so on. The anti-BDS resolution, you have about 235 Democratic members of the House, and roughly 220 out of the 235 voted for that resolution. So this notion that we have some grand crisis here and the Democratic Party is turning its back on Israel, read the resolution and look at the vote. And after all the talk, back and forth on a whole range of issues, and we could take up each one of them, when push came to shove, they wrote a strong anti-BDS resolution, and the overwhelming number of Democrats voted for it. Now, I think Donald Trump wants to identify the Democratic Party with the squad for a whole variety of reasons. Serves his political interests. If he was focusing on Israel, then that would be one thing. Of course, he attacks them for a whole range of things.
But are you suggesting when Thane says they're the rock stars, Trump has made them the rock stars?
Oh, he absolutely has had a significant role in making them the rock stars.
Do you feel that he's made them the rock stars?
No, not entirely. He's definitely part of it, but you can see how the press gravitated to them. I mean,
He talks about them every day. I know a specific member of Congress who had a confidential conversation with me, noted the fact that he's one of 40 Democrats, roughly, who entered the Congress after 2018 elections. He pointed out that he was saying, are overwhelmingly a moderate group, a centrist group, and a pro-Israel group. I mean, there's some diversity, but he said overwhelming, that's how we should be characterized. And he expressed his frustration that you don't read about anything that they do. The only people you read about is, quote, the squad.
And why is that?
But
it's not Trump. It's
with due respect.
Do me a favor. I'm happy to talk about Trump at some point if you want. At the moment, what Thane said has been my absolute experience. You turn on the TV, the word is not Trump. Here's what Cortez said. Here's what Tlaib said. Here's what Omar said. Has nothing to do with whether Trump tweets or not.
I'm not going to beat this to death. I simply want to say, look at his tweets and look at his coverage of those tweets and look at the amount of time and coverage that is given to the squad. Absolutely.
He doesn't give it. CNN gives it. MSNBC gives it. Fox give it.
All right.
You can't turn it on without seeing these guys.
Everybody gives it. They're four people. When it comes to Israel, and when it comes to BDS, and when it comes to the substance of this concern, the House of Representatives just put together a resolution, which again was supported by roughly 220 out of 235.
You're absolutely right.
That's what speaks to, it seems to me, the heart of the Democratic Party.
So what I hear you saying is, while there may be a rhetoric that comes out of the squad, you don't believe it is representative of the Democratic Party.
I don't. One other point, and then I'll be done. Look, among the candidates, there's a range of views. I'm going to agree with Thane on the Bernie Sanders issue, because I consider Sanders to be the one major candidate who has deeply problematic views of Israel that concern me very much. Generally speaking, despite the diversity, and given the fact that they approach these issues differently, and there are certainly some critical voices, and they all support two states, as do I, and as they should. But having said that, they're a moderate group. They all support a secure Israel, within reasonable boundaries, and they're a pro-Israel group of candidates.
Okay. Laura, what's your take on this? Does anything about where the Democratic Party is bother you? It seems to bother Thane. It does not bother Eric.
Well, I actually want to unpack a little bit of both what Rabbi Yoffie and Thane brought up, because I think they're both right. We have two trends simultaneously happening here, starting with Donald Trump. we know that 41% of the electorate is evangelical. It's an astounding percentage of the country. And most of those people have a very high affinity for Israel, are often more pro-Israel than the American Jewish community in a lot of ways. And they also have an affinity for the Republican Party. And that was a big part of Donald Trump's base when he was first elected. And if you notice in most of his attacks on the squad, which he does do with an alarming frequency, they usually mention Israel. Now, we also know that US voters don't generally vote on foreign policy issues. American Jews in particular, only about 6% say that any candidate's views on Israel will determine whether or not they vote for them at the end of the day. So American Jews who support Israel are put in a tough position if they are voting on issues of Israel, but the vast majority of them aren't. So we do see Donald Trump kind of propelling the squad into the news cycle. But also they are, as a journalist, they are interesting figures. You know, we have a refugee, the first refugee member of Congress. We have a Palestinian American who has a very interesting story. Ayanna Pressley and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also are, interesting new fresh faces. That being said, the majority of the Democratic Party, as Rabbi Yoffie said, is not in that progressive wing. It's a much less sexier topic in the news cycle, but the vast majority of American Democrats are kind of in the centrist moderate bloc. Also, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren might think of themselves as frontrunners, but they're both polling at around 6 to 7%. It's obviously still very early in the election cycle, but Joe Biden, who is a centrist, including on Israel policies, I would say, is far and away the frontrunner. And that includes with Jewish Americans. Something interesting about the American Jewish electorate is we're a much older demographic. About half of Jewish Americans are 55 plus. About 20% are 65 and older. And we see a trend with older voters towards more moderate conservative positions. And that means that most of the American Jewish community probably sides more with the centrist mainstream Democrats than with the progressive wing. I do think that we have a lot of Jews who are, doing a good job of getting media attention by shaking things up on the progressive wing. If Not Now in particular has been very interesting to follow because a lot of them, have day school education backgrounds, have been to Israel many times, but are, taking a very different conclusion than most of the community does. I think they've been very effective at bird-dogging candidates, getting themselves into, the room to ask questions they want to ask. That doesn't mean that the majority of American Jews or the majority of Democrats is very critical of Israel or the occupation. J Street actually commissioned a survey in May of Democratic voters. Only about 4% said they knew a lot about BDS or what it was. So I think a lot of our conversations, it's right for us to be concerned about how Americans feel about Israel, but I do think that we might be giving it a little too much hype if we, focus in on the very progressive wing of the party, which isn't really shaping policy.
Okay, so although you did a sophisticated analysis of both prior comments, it sounds to me like you're ultimately saying the issue you feel is a sexier issue in the media than it is in terms of toughness, what's going to happen to the Democratic Party and Jewish relationship to that party, correct?
Yeah, I don't like making predictions about the outcome of elections.
And you will not be held to anything.
Right. I would be surprised if a progressive candidate ended up being the Democratic nominee for president. That doesn't mean it can't happen, but that's not where the majority of the party is.
How many moderate candidates are there?
At this point, some of them are even hard to put on a spectrum, like Williamson. I don't know what she would qualify as. But I think people like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, these are moderate
you think
people.
Kamala Harris is a moderate?
I do. I think I would characterize her that way.
All right, we'll come back.
Great.
All right, Jonathan, you've heard 3 comments here. What's your perspective on this?
It's easy to limit the fuss over the squad. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, who's a moderate, was brutal to Israel when he was vice president and went to Israel and they built an apartment house, right? And
you should remind the audience what that was.
he visited Israel. I don't remember the exact year.
There was a question about settlement policy.
It was a
Right.
moratorium.
And what happened was he
Right.
went, and an announcement was made that there were going to be more apartments built, I believe, in East Jerusalem. And
Made for the purpose of embarrassing him.
how
I
do you
would
know that?
suggest.
How do you know that?
Because those were the reports at the time, that it wasn't necessary for that the government itself was angry at the announcement being made, and somebody thought this would be a good way to embarrass the vice
Okay.
president.
In
No,
any
but
case,
he made the choice to make it a fuss. He made a choice to kick up the dirt on it. That was Biden's choice. So the moderates are even cracking as a source of support for Israel. You go to any college campus, if you're a Zionist kid, you're in trouble. You can't speak up in class. You can't speak up on the quadrangle. This is also Democrats. They're all Democrats, the people who are shutting up the Jewish kid, right? The professors are all Democrats, the other students. So there's cracks everywhere you look. There's no place in America where the traditional moderate Democrat supporter for Israel is ascendant. Everywhere they're in decline. Now, people like Omar comes from a Somali district in Minnesota. People like Ocasio-Cortez comes from a very mixed district in Queens. But now, so you say, okay, well, that's their district. Now you see that the same people that supported Ocasio-Cortez, they're mounting the same kind of campaign to unseat Eliot Engel, who is a pro-Israel chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and they're trying to knock him off in a predominantly not predominantly, but in a Jewish district in Riverdale and Westchester. So how is that happening? And then the person, Jamal Bowman, who's running, and again, so you
yes,
have to
explain who he is.
Jamal Bowman is a principal in his 40s. He's a black person. He is being supported by the exact same small, I don't know what you call them, the small machine that supported Ocasio-Cortez. And he's gunning for Engel, and he brought up Israel when in his opening remarks and his follow-up remarks. He doesn't like Israel. It's oppressive. It's everything all these people said. So you step back and you say, is there any place where a traditional supporter of Israel is running in the Democratic Party? Are the people putting up primary oppositions anywhere in the 500 districts that are running next year? Is anybody pro-Israel that's young and up and rising? I don't know of any. Because years ago, Eliot Engel would be his district has been as safe as you can get for supporting Israel. Meanwhile, he buckled on letting Omar on the Foreign Affairs Committee. He's now buckling on staying in the good graces of the left because of this opposition. That's why he came out for impeachment this week, Engel. So you step back and you say, wait a second, things are not looking good. Because even the moderates have shown activity against us. The intellectuals on campus are against us. Plenty of newspapers are against us.
I understand. I want to hear you speak specifically to Eric's comment that lo and behold, the BDS resolution comes up in Congress. And it's not unanimous, but it's almost unanimous support by the Democrats in Congress.
The fact is that there have always been resolutions and moments where people duck for cover behind resolutions they can get behind. But the fact of the matter is, if you ask most of those people who voted for the resolution in the Democratic Party, do you think the settlements are legal? Do you think Israel is treating the Palestinians fairly? Or, suddenly you're going to see cracks. It's not going to be 235 to 15 anymore.
Okay. Are you surprised when I say to you, people I speak to, lovely, committed, bright, adult Jews who have been traditionally part of the Democratic Party. They view themselves, their self-identity as Democrat. They say to me, Mark, I'm worried now that I don't have a home in the Democratic Party. Are you surprised to hear me say that?
Not in the least.
Has anybody ever said that to you?
All the time.
Has anybody ever said that to you?
Yes.
Has anybody said that to you?
Most people I know say the opposite.
Has anybody ever said it to you?
Most people my age don't feel that way.
You think it's an age thing?
I do think in large part. I think, for example, as you know, I'm a modern Orthodox Jew on the Upper West Side, and people in my social circle who love Israel, I just got back from Israel last month, we use words like occupation and settlers because not only has that been the long-standing policy of the U.S. government, I mean, even George W. Bush talked about the occupation, but young Jews, I think, maybe, we've gotten a little entitled having a state around for so long that protects the Jewish people, but I think we are more willing to say, I love Israel. Israel is the home of the Jewish people. And I think that criticizing some of its policies is perfectly acceptable, which is no different from what Israelis themselves do.
What would you say to this?
Well, when Laura says, well, even her own friends and colleagues speak openly of occupation and settlers, I would say, well, yeah, that's true, but again, from a privileged position of someone who grew up with Israel and loves Israel. Today, because of Donald Trump, some of the things that he's done in the Middle East, moving of the embassy, the acceptance of the Golan as part of Israel's sovereignty, of course, the decertification of the Iran deal, the conversation has shifted so that when people speak the words two-state solution, they are speaking today, it seems like the far left position in a way that just a few years ago was not true. So when she says, well, even George W. Bush used those, yes, because the conversation was very different then. I actually think that on both sides there has been a kind of reassessment of, what do you mean a two-state solution, right? I mean, they're saying, what is that anymore? Does that even mean anything anymore? It's true that it may be true that Laura and her friends, who've given this a lot of thought, are still accepting of that position. But I think that argument, this is one of the things that I think was remarkable about the Trump administration, good or bad, you might like it or not, that he did change the conversation about Israel to a very large extent. And the Palestinians themselves became more irrelevant every day in terms of the conversation itself.
Is that good or bad?
I think they deserve to be irrelevant. I mean, I think they put themselves in a position of irrelevancy. And so this is what they got. This is what happens when you have this many decades of rejectionism and Jew hatred and genocidal fantasies and lying, right? So, and after what I would consider on an Israel position, a disastrous 8 years with Obama in the administration. And by the way, John, absolutely right. I would not get excited about Joe Biden as a supporter of Israel. Not anymore. I would not go, well, he's a moderate and therefore he's... Not really. I can imagine... Remember, this was an administration. I did not see him when the United States did not veto that resolution in the National Security Council, that it was worse than settlements being an obstacle to peace. It was that they're illegal and that East Jerusalem is illegal and the wall, it's like everything is illegal. It had nothing to say about Palestinian violence, nothing to say about Palestinian rejectionism and moral failure, nothing. So Biden was there. He was with that crew. And as far as I'm concerned, he has a lot of explaining to do to a pro-Israel community. And so to me, it's not as obvious when I hear Laura say, it's frankly upsetting to hear Laura say this way, because I'm thinking, Laura, in my view, she's a rock star. She's an opinion maker in the Jewish world. And I'm thinking, Laura, what television are you watching? Because yes, you and your friends on the Upper West Side don't feel this way. But there are places in Williamsburg, near where I live, that they don't feel this way, and that they do feel that to be openly critical of Israel now is cool. It's acceptable and it's cool. And to say things, and by the way, Kamala Harris, two-state solution. Again, these are dog whistles, right? They don't have any meaning anymore. I mean, you're just saying them, but they don't have meaning. And so it's not... I wouldn't surrender to this idea of a loss of a Democratic Party, but I will say this. I am a member of the Democratic Party, and I'm not alone in feeling that even if it's a small number, which is what I think Eric and Laura have convinced us of, it is still an openly critical one, and it gets a lot of attention. And the more you repeat this stuff, it has the potential, once it becomes normalized, it becomes the potential of snowballing. And we may be here in 6 months and have different numbers from Laura. And we could remember this day and say, wow, we had low numbers now, and now polling is different.
You're very patient. I saw you. You
I'm
did very well.
Jumping out of my seat here, truth be told. Look, it's as if, we're living in an alternate universe.
You have now described what living in this world is today.
Right.
There are people see the world, good people, see the world so differently, Eric.
I mean, first of all, I'm delighted to hear Laura say that she's is a young modern Orthodox woman in the Upper West Side, and where criticism is permissible, and they use the word occupation, and they can have this discussion. My daughter is a young modern Orthodox woman in the Upper West Side. She tells me about her experience in a different synagogue than the one that you go to. It's often fraught, but it's not easy for that to happen. And the fact she's saying it's happening, I think, is very encouraging. That's number one. Number two.
Can I stop you and then you
Yeah.
come to number two?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you use the word occupation the way Laura and her friends do?
I don't know how they're using it, so I can't. It's
When you do you just a minute?
There's a recognition of the.
Is
yeah.
Israel in some way doing something either illegal or brutal to the Palestinian people by staying on the West Bank?
They're engaged in an occupation which will have to, at least in part, ultimately end. Let me start with that. I want to be careful about the word brutal because that suggests that day by day that they're brutally treating the Palestinians.
Well, that's how it's described.
I don't believe that there's an answer in the short term to end the occupation. I do believe it's an occupation, and it must ultimately end if Israel's to be a Jewish and democratic state.
Okay, and you've made that point very often. I'm going to come back to your second point, but in terms of what you mean by the word occupation, or your friends mean, to what extent is it meant as a pejorative against Israel?
I think it's more just meant as a reality, as Rabbi Yoffie said.
Okay, not a pejorative.
It depends on the context. I mean, I don't think anyone is saying yay occupation. But I think that there's an important distinction between critical of Israel and anti-Israel. And I think we might be fuzzing that a little bit when we accuse Vice President Biden of not being good for Israel. There's also a difference between being pro-Netanyahu and pro-Israel. Most young Israelis are pro-Netanyahu. Most young American Jews are not pro-Netanyahu. Does that mean they're anti-Israel? I would say not.
I agree with you. All right. Come back to
Point number two is, and Laura just mentioned it now, look, we will need to have a discussion perhaps at some point in the future about Joe Biden. The notion that Joe Biden is not good for Israel, which we've heard from two of our panelists.
No, we said we're not that it's not good, but it's not an obvious pro-Israel candidate.
I
No,
believe
not at all.
I believe he's a good friend of Israel. I believe he's a pro-Israel person. I believe he has an excellent record. I've had some interaction with him on this. I think we'd have to tease that out at some length in order to go into it. I think, generally speaking, I'm going to suggest that in the American Jewish community, he is seen as a good friend of Israel. I have heard him speak with tremendous passion about Israel, more so than virtually any American politician. And my third point, two-state solution. Here, there's no question. Thane is right. The Republican Party and President Trump have moved away from that position, which has been the position of the party for many decades. They no longer use the term. They don't absolutely preclude it, although they seem to strongly suggest that that's not the direction in which they're going.
How does that go? Where does the Jared notion of this peace plan presented by the administration fit into the notion of they're against the two-state solution?
Well, because they're pressed on it repeatedly by people who want to know, is this your goal? And it's not your goal. Is there an openness here to this as a possibility for at least being a significant element of a solution? They absolutely refuse to engage with that question and give the strong impression, as I think that Thane was suggesting, that this is really not on their agenda. My point being, again, look at the BDS, anti-BDS resolution. it included two states, and there was a reason. And that is because the Democratic Party, in fact, does support the idea of two states, which has been the position of both parties, again, for many decades. Most American Jews, I want to suggest, continue to support the idea of two parties. And
Two states.
Two states. And that ultimately there will not be some kind of peace with the Palestinians, even if it takes us 100 years, in the absence of a two-state solution. So those who choose to distance themselves from it, that's their right. That's where the Trump administration is now. It's not where the Democratic Party is right now. And my view is, thank God, because in the absence of that, we're not going to have a Jewish and democratic state in Israel. We're going to have some other kind of Israel, and I don't believe that's what American Jews are looking for.
What do you think?
I think what has to be brought up is how most American Jews are distant from being Jewish and alienated from Jewish concerns. This is not their concern. And therefore, to say that most American Jews feel anything is almost irrelevant. For example, if you would say, let's say to a woman, by the way, if you tell a woman, here's a candidate, he's against abortion, but he's terrific on everything else. They wouldn't stand for that. They wouldn't say that's okay. If you tell a black, even right now, every group has their issue, and they wouldn't sacrifice that. Only Jews sacrifice their issue because only Jews have sacrificed their identity to the extent that Jews have. So therefore, I think you have to step back and say, who are these American Jews, and are we seeing the aftermath of the absolute decay of the American Jewish people?
As you listen to this,
Well, this is, I mean, it's interesting because this is, the split between where the Orthodox Jewish American community is heading and the non-Orthodox, just in terms of how their identity manifests, is a research interest of mine. And, you're right in some ways. Like 70% of non-Orthodox Jews marry a non-Jewish partner. We can discuss whether that's a good thing, a bad thing, a reality of assimilation and being accepted by this adopted culture. But the reality is the Orthodox community, which has much higher birth rates, is in a lot of ways moving to the right, both politically and in terms of lifestyle, and non-Orthodox Jews are moving in the other direction. I don't think that I wouldn't presume to be able to define Jewish identity in the way that I personally choose to identify as Jewish. I think that, the parent company of JTA is 70 Faces Media because there's 70 valid interpretations of the Torah and the oral tradition. So I wouldn't presume to say that because someone's Jewish life looks different than mine, it's wrong. I just think that, there's a lot of room for interpreting what it means to be a Jewish American, and sometimes that looks very traditional, and sometimes it doesn't. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other.
I certainly agree with you, except for one thing. If a Jew doesn't care, and that's where Jonathan started.
Exactly.
If a Jew can be a Jew any way they want, including wholly secular, as far as I'm concerned. But they got to care. They've got to identify with and want to be part of the Jewish family.
Well, Bernie
Jewish
Sanders
people.
is a great example of that, I think. He's someone who's very visibly identifiable as, the stereotype of a Brooklyn Jew. He uses his Jewish identity to engage with Israel. He doesn't manifest it in ways that maybe the majority of American Jews would appreciate, but we can't tell people to engage and then criticize them for engaging in ways that we disagree with.
Although we tend to do that all the time.
We do. We're good at that, yes.
But I don't know what you're talking about. I've met Jews who are angry at Bernie Sanders for his positions. Mm-hmm. I haven't met a Jew who said, you know what? That's a bad Jew. Nobody's ever used
Are you kidding?
Nobody's
Ben
ever.
Shapiro tweets it all the time.
Self-hating Jew used to...
By the way,
yeah.
he may be a self-hating Jew, but he's a self-hating Jew. And you've touched on, and I have it in my notes, it's something I was going to ask you to talk about, because part of my question for the four of you is To what extent, and I'm picking up on what Jonathan just said, to what extent is there a larger issue which this political discussion sort of touches upon, namely, is it true that most Jews who are part of the Democratic Party are very committed to Jewish principles as reflected in all of the what I consider to be the highest values, the aspirations both of the Democratic Party and the Jewish people, which is why I believe Jews have been so much at home in the Democratic Party. But are these also Jews who are really committed to the Jewish future? I would love to know what percentage of Jews who are part of the Democratic Party have visited Israel. To what extent are they part of institutional life that is fighting for the state of Israel? To what extent are Jews who support the things that have been said about Israel from within the Democratic Party, even if it's on the fringe, it doesn't really bother them because they have bigger concerns? And there's a question as to, there are some Jews who will say, my number one concern is the state of Israel. When I go into the ballot box to throw my vote for a presidential candidate, my first priority is, are they good for Israel? And I hear other American Jews saying, that is a violation of what it means to be an American Jew. An American Jew should not make something having to do with another country their priority if that president, as good as he might be for Israel, isn't good for America.
But this goes to the larger question that Jonathan was raising, which is, do they care? What you're seeing, I think, and Laura, I think, has intimated this, is that you have a huge number of Jews of her generation who identify with Tikkun Olam Judaism, which isn't really Judaism. It's just some secular mythology that says, I express my Judaism by being a really socially activist person. So I'm really, really involved in all things progressive. And that's how I'm a Jew. It's like, thank you very much. We don't need that. And too many people are identifying that way. So that therefore it's very unfashionable for them to say, well, Israel is my number one priority, because no, I have to find the social justice issue about Israel. And therefore, I condemn Israel on social justice grounds. And that's what's really different. I want to know who among the Jewish community is defending Israel when Israel's being demonized. Because as a university person for too many decades, what I see is Jewish professors and Jewish students with their heads down, afraid, because it's frankly too uncool.
You know, I spoke to a liberal rabbi this week, and I was talking to him about politics. I said, "You ever talk about politics?" He says, I don't talk politics." Guess which side of the street he was on? Because I've never heard a liberal rabbi say, "I don't talk politics" in this day and age. There's not a liberal rabbi I know who's not proud to talk about politics. But the conservative rabbi, small c, they say, "I don't talk politics."
Are you okay?
Look, first of all, we're speaking in sweeping generalizations here that are problematic. The American Jewish community is a large community. It's a diverse community. The reality of that community is a committed core, which includes many Orthodox Jews and also, by the way, many non-Orthodox Jews, Reform, Conservative, or those not specifically affiliated.
Absolutely.
And people who express that Judaism in a whole variety of ways. And by the way, social justice concerns are important and legitimate. I mean, a whole series of books saying social justice Jews, and they're not really Jews, and they're not really committed, and so on and so forth. And the other side of that is social justice and politics are absolutely central to any reasonable view of what Torah is about. And you can approach it in a whole variety of ways. It doesn't make you either a Republican or a Democrat, but it's part of Jewish experience, tradition, and commitment. So let's, and by the way, the reality in the Orthodox community is also more complicated than sometimes we're willing to acknowledge.
Yes, and by the way, I don't think you are not saying that social justice is not a Jewish concern.
No.
It's just that you don't want to identify that as if that is Judaism.
It's an excuse to not know Torah, and I am not a religious Jew, but
Okay.
it's an excuse to say,
Okay.
I am Jewish because I believe in Tikkun Olam, and so therefore that makes me Jewish.
There are many social justice Jews who have a broad range of Jewish commitment, who understand what the word mitzvah means, who understand what the word Torah means, and they see social justice as being central.
You're
and
absolutely
foundational.
right.
And I support those Jews.
Yes. Here's my concern as I'm listening to this. Every one of us has the world in which we operate and live and experience, and whom do we brush up against? And there's a tendency to think that the world we're in is the whole world. So I hear what you say, Eric. I do not doubt for a moment that what you're describing is true for you. And when I say for you, not for you, but for you, in terms of the community that you're part of. And you're part of the more, you're part of the more traditional side of the reform movement. You've been an activist, you've been a thinker. It does not surprise me that the people you know are the people who are most engaged and most committed. And they're not simply committed to Tikkun Olam, a phrase I hate.
You and me
they're
both.
committed to something much larger, including the state of Israel. What I worry about is this. I have experience, because of JBS, nothing I've done, I'm hearing all the time and talking to people in a broader context than I normally would get a chance to do. And what I fear is you're talking about a very small, committed, but small swath of the Jewish community, including within the Democratic Party. And what bothers me as somebody who grew up in the Democratic Party, it's not simply that there are it's really three in the squad who have taken strong anti-Israel positions. It's that what bothers the Jews whom I talk to is that I said it this way during the open, they're the grown-ups, the Schumers, the Pelosi's, the Blumenthals, who's the California woman? Feinstein. Elliot Engel. I hear all of them say nothing. So Cortez says that what America is doing on the borders is creating concentration camps. That is such a historically outrageous comment that all I wanted somebody within the Democratic, I don't want it to be Trump, I don't want it to be Mark Golub, I want it to be a Pelosi or a Blumenthal or a Cardin to say, Representative Cortez, you're out of line, you're nuts, there's a historical accuracy, a historical reference that you're making that trivializes one of the worst moments, if not the single worst moment in human history. When Tlaib says that she is comforted by the fact that her Palestinian people created a safe haven for Jews, the factual dishonesty in that statement, and I'm not sure she knows it's dishonest, the inaccuracy of it is so gross that you have to have the grown-ups say, you have to have Pelosi say to her, come into my office. I want to explain to you what the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem was. I want to show you the picture of the Grand Mufti sitting with Adolf Hitler, promising Hitler that he would do in Eretz Yisrael, the Middle East, what Hitler was trying to do to the Jews in Europe. Do you understand that the Palestinians worked to keep the doors closed to Jews in World War II? The Palestinians did not help the Jews get to Israel. And the Jews did not destroy the Palestinian people. They did not take anybody's land. And they did not destroy human dignity. And there's an ongoing problem now. We're trying to solve it. But to think of that, to suggest that is history. And when Tlaib says that, and it's picked up by CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, on the internet, there are people who don't know enough to know Well, that's historically ludicrous. It's historically ludicrous. And the grown-ups in my party are not saying to her, excuse me, do you know
I
how
think that's true, Mark.
If I can respond to a few things you just brought up, I think number one, we have seen Nancy Pelosi very publicly call out members of the so-called squad several times. We also don't know what happens behind closed doors.
It has to be in public.
She has publicly called out the members of the
excuse me.
squad and dismissed them
I have
as
seen
irrelevant.
nobody in the Democratic Party say the use of concentration camps was
So
unacceptable.
that was going to be what I was going to get to next. I think that there actually is, and I see this from the side of an editor, there's a lot of debate in the Jewish community about the use of that term.
It's crazy then.
And I personally, I think there are valid arguments on both sides of use of that term.
Do you know what a concentration camp was?
I do. We
Tell me
interned Japanese
then tell me-
Americans in the United
An
States.
internment camp is not a concentration camp.
Okay, well,
tell
we'll
me one
agree to
thing,
disagree
Tell me
then on
one
that one.
way in which whatever is being done on the border is like Buchenwald or Auschwitz. Are people being made to work till they die? Are people being denied food?
I don't want to drag this into this level
Are they
here,
given
but
a piece of bread a day?
they're being forced to drink toilet water.
They are
that's
not
deplorable.
being forced to drink toilet water.
Okay,
And you
that's
heard
not
that
what the
from
record
Cortez.
shows.
You
No,
heard that
I
from
didn't.
Cortez. They're
I-
not
I-
being
Are you
forced.
defending the
They're not
situation
being-
on
Yeah,
the border?
I-
By the way,
When I am
the
not
Associated
defend- when I am
Press,
what I'm
defending
hearing is
it-
a defense.
When I
Yeah.
am defending, when I'm,
I don't
am
think
de-
you understand how distressing this is
I am
to
sorry.
many in the Jewish community, not to mention in
they
the
have
broader
been
American
they
community.
have been hoodwinked. They've been hoodwinked. The people who are like you and I are not saying anything. There is no concentration camp anywhere in America. It is just. But wait, you're the child of survivors.
I'm with you, so don't worry. Don't worry. I'm your wing
What
guy
do you,
here.
What do you hear?
I'm
what,
shocked
what
that
do you-
Laura said anything that Laura said. Shocked.
And what do you
Literally
say?
shocked.
When you,
Well, I
is
think-
my tirade against
first of
somebody
all,
saying
no one,
concentration camp misplaced?
everybody that crossed the border did so voluntarily. No Jew ever went voluntarily into a concentration camp. But the Associated Press did some fact checking on this stuff, and it's not a right-wing organization that there's no cages for kids. A lot of this stuff is just propaganda that has been spoken often enough to assume the weight of fact. But
Also,
We're in different media
I feel-
universes
I-
then, because
I
this
feel
is
you've been
not
had.
the reality.
I feel you've been had.
We
And I'm
feel-
saying something.
I don't want to speak for
I'm
anyone
saying
else.
something.
I
We
feel
feel the
you've
same
been-
way.
Even if, and I don't believe anyone was forced to drink toilet water, but if that's the worst thing that happens to somebody, it's not a concentration camp. It's just.
And
I happen to feel that concentration camp was an inappropriate term to be used.
and I wouldn't even
But-
be
And I thought
debating.
you
but-
said that.
You know who Zev Chafetz is?
Yes.
All right, he's a good friend of mine. He's a superb writer, and he's a rightist, and I'm a leftist, and that's the way it's been for 50 years. He wrote a very good piece on this, and the heart of it was the Democrats, they're not so bad. Don't let Trump, turn this into a war. Shouldn't be a war. He specifically mentioned Tlaib and Omar, and the fact that when they've said unfortunate things, the Democrats have come forward and brought them into line. So I'll show you the article. The fact that he wrote that as a right-wing journalist in Bloomberg was very important to me. So what I want to suggest to you is this notion of total silence in the face of outrages from the squad is not, I think, a reflection of the reality.
You think
of
I'm
what's
missing
happened.
it?
I think you're missing it.
Do you think I'm missing it?
No, I don't. But can I just talk about Laura's? I want to be clear when I said shocked, then we come back. So what I said to Laura is like, I can't believe I have to even explain this. But you do know, we all know, we can agree on the numbers. 2 out of every 3 Jews of Europe were killed during Holocaust. 2 out of every 3. I'm sure that Tlaib doesn't know this or she could care less, but that's the numbers. And I will say to you, Laura, Jews deserve to own that term. I don't want to get into this is an internment and that's not an internment, and some moron wrote an article, and I'm using the word moron. Some moron wrote from the Holocaust Museum, I'll say it again, moron, from the Holocaust Museum, actually wrote something to defend this argument. Jews have the right for the iconography 2 out of every 3 Jews. Concentration camps, barbed wires. If you're going to use train tracks, it only means one thing: Jewish death. It only means one thing. And that's what I don't understand. That's, I think, what Mark is saying, that Jewish adults should be able to stand up and say, no, this is not what this is about. And I don't want to debate the term of art that someone in the Holocaust Museum said you can actually use it in another way. I'm saying you can't. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. I've written 5 novels about post-Holocaust world. I say you can't. I say we own that. Can we at least own that? 2 out of 3 Jews, all of Europe, were killed. That's what we own. Train tracks, barbed wires, concentration camps, that's ours. And that's not something you can take and use it for something else. Now, it may be that Mark is saying, and by the way, it's totally misapplied, which is the point you're saying. You're saying, oh, and on top of that, and John is saying, I don't want to get into that. I just want to say, I want Laura Adkins to write. That's why I'm shocked. Because you are the rock star. I want you to go, you know what? I am a much closer age to you, and I need to school you here. You know, we know you're virtually uneducated, and so let me help you at least here. And that's what when I said, I want to be clear what I meant, right? It was just, I was shocked because I thought we as Jews were on the same page here. We got this. This was ours, and we understood what that meant, and that we weren't allowing you to hijack those terms for something that is, again, misapplied.
You know, it's funny that in a generation that believes in the idea of cultural appropriation, the one group that you're allowed to appropriate in the most obscene way is the Jew.
I just want to say she's getting this from Jews. I think I totally hear you, Thane. I think that, you know, the legacy of the Holocaust is not something that should ever be diminished. But I also know that the end of the tour of every Holocaust museum I've been to is, how do we keep this from never happening again? I'm not suggesting that we are committing a genocide on our southern border. However, young Jewish activists have been very visibly and very vocally pushing back against conditions in, you know, what's happening on our southern border, who are children and grandchildren of survivors, using Holocaust terminology.
Well, they shouldn't.
They're Jews, and they're owning that legacy. So I think there's valid interpretations of that.
Jews, they're ignorant non-Jews. What bothers me is that people who know better, including Eric Yoffie, isn't saying to them, actually you do say it though, you were upset by the term.
I thought the term was an inappropriate term.
Okay, but I would even say to you, I want you to say, by the way, you may be totally against what we're doing on the southern border. And the issue of immigration and how we deal with it is an issue worthy of discussion in my mind. I don't see it as black and white. I see it as very complicated. Very complicated.
But concentration camp is black and white.
Yes, but there's no concentration camp. And I know what Cortez was doing. What Cortez was really saying is, it's not a concentration camp. It's that we've got a Hitler in the White House. We got a Nazi in the White House. She says that ICE are Nazis. And I want Jews to say, and here's Eric I want Jews to say, come on, you can be so much against a policy or even a person in public office, but you don't have to distort it. And the last thing you do, you never use sacred words. Anything having to do with the Holocaust is sacred to the Jewish people. And you trivialize everything the minute you call somebody who has to drink from a toilet in a concentration camp. I want to see where major figures in the Democratic Party have said to Cortez, you cannot use the word concentration camp. And I want to see major figures in the Democratic Party say, Congresswoman Tlaib, the Palestinians did not create a safe haven for Jews. And one of the people, when I've talked about this to other people, their answer, and I'd be curious to know what you think, is that it's not that she's buckling under pressure, but she doesn't know better.
Well, the Tlaib issue actually was taken out of context, and we did an explainer on this in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. What she said was that she's comforted by the fact, and this is her narrative, that her family was displaced, and at least they were displaced to create a safe haven for people who were just devastated by the Holocaust. I am, there is a historical record of displacement of Palestinians from the land of Israel, and she wasn't saying that Palestinians created the Jewish state. So I disagree with Rashida Tlaib on most Israel issues,
But not this one?
But I'm not a Palestinian. That's not my people's narrative.
No, you said you disagree on some issues.
Right.
Not this one?
I don't think it's an issue. I think that people misquoted her.
Okay. By the way, the criticism of her was misplaced, the initial. The initial was, how does she feel comforted?
Right.
And use the word Holocaust.
Right.
She never said that.
Right.
But I'm now going to read what she said. And she didn't say what you said. When I think of the tragedy of the Holocaust, there's a calming feeling in the fact that it was my ancestors, Palestinians, who lost their land, and some lost their lives, their livelihood, their human dignity, their existence in many ways, had been wiped out. And some people's passports. I mean, just all of it was in the name of trying to create a safe haven for Jews.
Right.
Right?
That's what she was saying. Displaced. That's displacement.
Yes. And
that's what I said.
To do what?
To create a safe haven for
Well,
the
they
Jewish
weren't
people.
displaced because they were trying. No Palestinian was trying to create a safe haven for Jews.
That's not what that quote says. She
I'll
said
read it again. I mean,
Okay.
was in the name of. She feels comforted by the fact that what they did was in the name of trying to create a safe haven for Jews.
As if we were welcoming
And
you.
I love the fact, she says, it was my ancestors that provided it in many ways. Her ancestors did not provide.
We're hearing that differently then, because I hear those same words as, at least all these bad things that happened to my family were in the name of creating a state. I don't hear this as, my people opened our doors. That's not what she's saying.
That is what she's saying.
I
And
mean,
I guess
is that what you're
this is why there's Torah, I guess, and why there's Drush. It seems so obvious
I
to
mean,
me.
the Peshat of that, I think we're interpreting differently than you are.
The Peshat is, all of it was in the name. In the name. Was it in the name of trying to create a safe haven?
Mark,
Was it in the name?
Yes.
No, it was not in the name.
was.
Okay, so you and I disagree now
is-
factually. No
I guess we do.
Palestinian did anything.
No, they were displaced to create
What's
states.
it mean in the name? What's it mean? What's the phrase mean? In the name of.
To create.
That's correct. Nothing was
Right.
done to create.
I wrote an article on Tlaib. Have you read my article on Tlaib? Go to Haaretz, you will find it. And
What did you say, bottom line?
I ripped her to pieces. But, the heart of the matter was, she's the most dangerous of them all. Not because she's a Palestinian, I mean, we need to deal with Palestinians, but because she is a committed one-state person, and she makes spurious arguments, in my view, utterly spurious arguments, in my view, on why there can only be one state, which is not going to be a binational state, which is what she's talking about. It's going to be an Arab state. Part of the reason why we need to be a little more committed to the notion of two states, because otherwise we end up with Tlaib. So in any case, I haven't been the least bit hesitant about going after her. And I think of the squad, she is the one, as an Israel lover, that I'm most concerned about. Because A, she's sophisticated, and B, at the same time, she also seems to be ignorant about many of the realities. But I just want to suggest there needs to be outrage on the other side, and there needs to be a reluctance to suggest that people who are torn by this are somehow, excusing or dismissing the Holocaust. Nothing could be further from the truth.
I want to add something that John said. It was interesting because he was referring to Laura, because he said something like, it's amazing, it's just one generation. And then all of a sudden, I will give you, your audience, our viewers, will love this anecdote. Many people were fans of Seinfeld in the 1990s. I wrote in the 1990s about the soup Nazi episode. And I said, it's not funny. He's actually a disagreeable guy who sells soup. He's not a Nazi. I wrote about that Giuliani's police, they were actually not the Gestapo. You may not like the NYPD, they're not the Gestapo. A few years ago, I think it was for you actually, I think it might have been for JTA, someone called me and I wrote an essay about when Larry David was on Saturday Night Live, and he told that joke about two people trying to hit on a girl at a concentration camp before she was like taking her clothes off, and he said something like, "Hey, you know what? He was, you know, as if this is what they had on their mind, hitting on women." And so when Mark said the word trivialization, and when I use the word ownership, that's why you heard in that our voices. Because the truth is, now let me just say, to Mark's point, 20-some-odd years ago, and I can't remember who I wrote that for, the soup Nazi thing, I cannot tell you how many people wrote me thanking me for that. To say, you know, you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about that before. And it isn't funny. A guy who sells soup, who's not nice to his customers, isn't the soup Nazi. And so, but I do think with that, what John is saying, that we are more casual today. So that when we hear the word, oh, come on, she's just saying concentration camp in a very informal way, like the Japanese internment, or just concentration camp because someone from the Holocaust Museum said it's okay. And so therefore, and I'm going, this to me is outrageous. Because 20 years ago, and I'm not that old, 20 years ago, I wrote about a joke in the Soup Nazi in a Seinfeld episode, and people called to congratulate me, thank you for calling attention to it. So I just thought this is a cultural anecdote that's worth thinking about when we think about, well, is it something that we should excuse? Come on, she didn't mean it that way. I think we know what she meant. I think it's very clear what she meant. I also think it's very important in the demonization of Israel to elevate, again, the idea of, oh yes, and the next thing you know, Jews are creating concentration camps in Gaza, right? That we can trivialize, turn this around and take the iconography that happened to Jews and use it against them. And that's why I feel very strongly that at least the people at this table should be on the same page, at least on this, at least on this.
I'm not a fan of the way that she phrased things, but I also know that there are passionate, committed Jews who are having serious disagreements about the use of that term.
No, right, but that's what you said. That's why I said I was heartbroken. I wasn't referring to you specifically. Saying it's heartbreaking to hear that this is a discussion, like that you guys are actually saying, well, you know, there's a lot of people who really think it is appropriate to use that, and they're very well-meaning, well-intentioned Jews. And I go, that's heartbreaking, because John's point is right. It wasn't that long ago, you know, there's still Holocaust survivors living. And so while they're still alive, can we at least not misapply the things that happened to them and apply it in a way that is totally trivializing and totally normalizing, that it just simply isn't appropriate, and it should represent one thing and one thing only.
Well, I think it is true that there's this big generational gap that manifests both with, you know, how we talk about the Holocaust, how we talk about Israel, you know, generational shifts happening here. I think a lot of this is due to, you know, Israel is a very young country. The Holocaust, unfortunately, was recently. And that means in, you know, 20-year chunks of time, you have pretty big evolutions in how people think about these concepts. So,
look, the reality is that, and Eric alluded to this a moment ago, people have very different ideas. And it may be that you're talking to people who absolutely have the best of intentions and the best values, and what they want for people is that all people be treated with a certain sense of human dignity, and they feel that it's not being done. And from my perspective, they're using an inappropriate word, but I think what you're trying to say is what's motivating them is a concern for other people, and so they're using a certain language. I think the people who use the word, really, in their mind, there is no difference. And that's what bothers me. What frightens me is it means that history already is being not more than diluted, it's just being, it's evaporating, yes.
Which is why I started off by saying, can we just get to numbers? 2 out of every 3 Jews of Europe, because this is the astonishing number that most people walking around the street don't know this. So if you're not saying, what? 2 out of 3 people? Yes, 2 out of 3.
It's not that. You know, we do a program here called Witness, where people who are still with us come on and talk about it. And sometimes I'll ask them a question. What was it like to, or were you ever, you know, were you hungry? Were you cold? Were you frightened? Did you cry? But I remember I said to her, I don't remember how I got to it, because this question seems so simple, about hunger. And he looked at me. He said, "You don't understand. There's no way to describe to somebody what the hunger was."
You know, Primo Levi wrote about this very idea.
It is beyond. For you to ask me the question, it means you don't understand. And then he said to me, "It's not your fault. Nobody can understand."
Primo Levi's, I think I have the quote right, there are no words that can be used to describe this offense, the demolition of a man. And that whole paragraph in Survival of Auschwitz, 2 paragraphs, that's devoted to the concept of language, that the words that we use are, again, misapplied.
Okay.
They can't possibly mean the same
In
thing.
this context, though, I am open to your showing me or Eric showing me that I'm wrong, and that, in fact, there were grown-ups in the Democratic Party who did speak out publicly, doesn't count otherwise, publicly against the use of the word concentration camp and against this notion that the Palestinians somehow created a safe haven for Jews.
But in light of what we started talking about Democrats, because I'm also, like you guys, a lifelong Democrat. I
Yes,
remember.
but the audience should know. I
Yeah.
brought 4 Democrats together.
Right.
Please notice there's no Republican at this table.
Right.
And that put me in a little bit, I felt the conversation should be crafted with the knowledge that all of us are within a certain context. If I'd had Ken Abramowitz here, I would have been having to open up a discussion of a different nature. This was a discussion among people who basically have the same orientation, and also for people who care about Israel. And then I wanted to hear what you had to say about the experience I've had and also the concerns I've had. But you're correct.
No, so what I'm thinking, because I'm afraid right now, I'm not just disagreeing with this guy or that guy, I'm afraid that I see a rippling, a murmuring of anti-Semitism. I'm not afraid of school shooters. I'm afraid of the campus. I'm afraid of newspapers. I'm afraid of the intellects. I'm afraid that something's changing in the culture. And I'm thinking, well, in hindsight, I love the New Deal. You know, I grew up with that being the ideal and Woody Guthrie and the whole thing. But in hindsight, if I was around then, should I have voted for Wilkie in 1940 when the gates were closed? Should I have voted for Lyndon Johnson when he said we're neutral at the beginning of the Six-Day War? I don't think so. So I'm thinking all these people were saying, oh, I was the Democrat the whole way through until like 5 minutes ago. I'm thinking maybe we should not have been Democrat. Well, we could have been Democrats, vote for, LaGuardia. But should I have voted for Roosevelt? Should I have voted for all these people that really jeopardized the Jewish people?
You can't go back. Life's very complicated.
No, but that's why going forward.
That's right. I don't need to go back. But I do want to know what we're doing as we move forward, and that's
Right.
what you're saying. I want to hear your sum up here. As people are listening to you, and you do represent a slightly, you're a different generation. Okay? But as our audience listens to you, what do you want to be their takeaway from the perspective you've tried to share here?
Well, I think it's very interesting that, the 4 of us fall somewhere on the left of the political spectrum, at least in the United States. Yet, we seem very bifurcated on our worldviews, even, interpreting certain quotes and giving certain people the benefit of the doubt, or certain values that we see, or how we even define pro-Israel. So I think that is very interesting, that there is still a lot of nuance, even within, committed American Jews who fall on the left of the spectrum. Also, I think it'll be interesting to hear what people think about just, some generational and, the Orthodox versus non-Orthodox, both perspectives and, how those puzzle pieces of the community fit together. But no, I think there will be a lot of interesting things happening in the lead up to 2020. And it'll be interesting to see how Israel and the American Jewish community plays into that.
Oh, absolutely. Are you optimistic?
I always try to be optimistic. Studies show that people who are optimistic live longer. So I'm just trying to ride that wave.
Good for you. 120 more so. What's your takeaway? What do you want people to think about as they think of this show?
The Democrats are an enormously diverse, complicated party America has undergone a tremendous change over the course of the last 5 decades, from segregation to multiculturalism. That's reflected in the Democratic Party. There are troubling developments. There is a small minority that we have to worry about a great deal. But I continue to be inspired by many of the leaders of the Democratic Party, and I continue to be convinced that overwhelmingly they are moderate, middle of the road, and very strong supporters of the state of Israel.
So you are optimistic at the moment.
I am optimistic.
That's nice. Your comment.
You know, there. What is the? I don't know. It's an ancient Asian wisdom or something. Well, may you live in interesting times.
Yes.
It's a curse. Yeah.
It's a curse, right? It's a curse. This is not. We are living in interesting times, and I think we're going to remember this era. I'm profoundly skeptical and pessimistic. I feel like Jewish Americans, there has been a change. We haven't figured it out yet. We're coming, I think, to the grips, the consequences of assimilation, of being accepted as too widely into the mainstream. As Laura knows, as John and Eric knows, the intersectional myth is that Jews are just white people. They're just white rich people, colonialists, settlers. And so the experience of what John was describing, remembering, what it was like to grow up in a house and idolize Roosevelt, we're not part of that social movement anymore, that at least the sense of an immigrant community. And I think that what we've seen, how this discussion started with the squadron, and even this discussion with the concentration camps, is the outgrowth of these changes. And one could blame Donald Trump on the sense that, well, his language has changed, and so everyone's language has changed, and we've normalized a kind of discourse that, we accept, these things, but the people always felt this way. They just weren't comfortable talking about it. But I'm profoundly uncomfortable talking about it. I think that when you talk about these things, they do become normalized. This is what
These things?
Positions about Jews, who they are, what they represent, Israel's place in the world. One of my neighbors was telling me the other day, he's from Ireland, and so he said, you do know we Irish really hate Israel and we love the Palestinians. And I said, yeah, I know that. He wanted me to know. I said, no, I know that, and now there's something coming next, right? You're about to tell me something. And this is what he said to me. He's not watching, but this is what he said. He said, when your people were given Israel in 1967, he said 1967, and at that point, when you immediately took over Palestinian land, that's what we're talking about. And I thought, wow, that was, and he was schooling the law professor. He wanted me to know what the problem was, the Irish wisdom, and he was so clear. And I'm thinking, when you normalize this kind of buffoonery, he's walking around actually speaking openly like he knows something. This is a problem. We have a lack of education. Mm-hmm. People really don't know what they're talking about. They don't want to know what they're talking about. Everyone is locked into their own story. And we're openly, on the internet, we have opened up a kind of non-conversation of simply shouting and condemning. And what we're seeing with the squad and what we're seeing in the halls of Congress, I think, are manifestations of that. And I think it's going to get worse. I don't think it's going to get better.
We kidded you with the truth that you're a rock star. But I want you to know all 4 of you are rock stars. And I invited you here very purposefully. And I love sitting with you. And I love every one of you. And I believe that you make an extraordinary contribution, each in your own voice, to the larger discussion that I really want the Jewish community here and all the people who are not Jewish who listen. So I cannot thank you enough. I love sitting with you. I will invite you over and over again. Thane, Eric, John, all of you. Thank you very, very much. We will continue. And when you say, Laura, that we're about to enter really a very interesting election year, there may be other opportunities for me, and we'll talk about what are we comfortable talking about together at this table, because whatever we can talk about can only be to the benefit of people who get to hear what you have to say. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thane Rosenbaum, Eric Yoffie, Laura Adkins, Jonathan Mark, 4 individuals who are writing and speaking and thinking and sharing perspectives with us all the time. It's an honor to bring them to you on this roundtable for L'chaim. As always, I want to know what you think. And if you want to be in touch with any of our 4 panelists, if you email to me, I will email to them. I love to hear from you. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And remember, you can now take L'chaim anywhere you want. We're a podcast, iTunes, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. Take L'chaim with you in the car when you're running, and listen to a discussion like this or any of the other people who I'm privileged to sit with on L'chaim. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.